Sustainable You is a casual, interactive, yet informative series detailing and cataloging the sustainability experience. Moreover, this is a short podcast docuseries detailing the thoughts and experiences of passionate advocates towards all things eco-friendly. Our journey is to know how and why understanding sustainable development towards the triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet can contribute to a more mindful, holistic, and inclusive world. Specifically, this podcast showcases what makes you a changemaker, innovator, and transformer as you tackle sustainability challenges for current and future generations to resolve those so-called wicked problems. The Reb Rebel Brigade is an international performance activist troupe that utilizes silent, slow-motion performance and non-violent civil disobedience towards climate action, drawing attention to the burgeoning global ecological crisis, symbolizing the loss of life from environmental destruction. Participating members in the acts of protest are depicted for their distinctive appearance as they don vivacious scarlet red robes, veils, and gloves alongside opaque white face paint. The color of red itself is symbolic of the lifeblood that connects all species, as the mantra goes, advocating against animal cruelty and for environmental stewardship. I first came across the Reb Rebel Brigade during my travels overseas studying abroad in Visby, Sweden, last summer in June 2024. I was simply mesmerized by their unwavering dramatics as the Red Rebels drifted elegantly through the heart of the old town's main square. It definitely leaves a worthwhile and lingering impression for onlookers who fussily try to clue in on what the act itself depicts. It was fascinating to discover how the artistic medium of performance activism can mobilize others to gain a sense of agency and adopt an ethic of care toward combating the climate crisis. In this Inside Scoop and in-depth two-part episode series, we invite you to learn more about the Reb Rebel Brigade and its revelation with its founder, Doug Francisco, a multidisciplinary artist, activist, and storyteller who has a background in music, street performance, and theater. So, stay tuned and enjoy. So, before we get you to introduce yourself, we're just going to play a really quick icebreaker. It's just a list of adjectives and words, and you just choose one that basically describes your, persona in regards to your vocation and why you're spearheading this movement.
Yes, I'll go with bold, I guess.
Okay, great. And why did you choose that word?
Well, I was torn between quirky, calm, because I'm feeling quite calm right now. But I think bold sums things up a bit more in terms of a lot of the stuff I do as an artist and an activist, maybe.
Okay, great. Yeah. Bold is actually a really popular choice. I can see why you would choose that word. Okay, and just in regards to that, I wanted to ask you what makes you uncertain and what makes you curious?
What makes me uncertain? Well, as a lack of information can do that, I guess. But I feel like everything's a bit uncertain anyway. The future is unwritten and all that, and you can never tell what's around the corner. So I'm quite down with the uncertainty of things.
What makes you curious?
Something that is alluring and enigmatic, I suppose. I like things that catch my imagination and pique my interest in that way, I guess. And that makes me curious.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. And before we get to know you a little bit better, do you want to actually go ahead and introduce yourself,
who you are, what you do, your background. It would be great.
Yeah, sure. My name's Doug Francisco. I'm a ringmaster and founder member of a circus theatre company called the Invisible Circus. I'm kind of involved in the reclamation of community space a little bit by recycling old buildings or underused buildings. Was a founder of the Art Space Life Space charity in Bristol. And we sort of take over underused spaces and campaign for more community space in the kind of urban landscape, I guess. And I'm a bit of a visual artist as well. I like working with found materials and recycled materials. And I do a lot with sea plastic as my current passion, of which there's an abundant amount, unfortunately. I started out creatively in kind of music and art, really, as a young man. Kind of embraced performance stuff in my 20s when I started to travel as a street performer, and a kind of a clown and mime artist and things like that. And I grew up on a small island in the Irish Sea called the Isle of Man, which is quite a small, isolated place. Or certainly was back then, a little bit less so now. I spent a lot of years in London in the early 90s in the kind of underground art, rave scene and squat scenes, and then travelled for around 10 years before returning to England and carrying on with the circus and theatre company. And we've been based in Bristol since 2005.
Hey, great. Thanks for sharing. And it seems like you have a diverse breadth, a little bit of everything, which is really interesting to hear that. And do you want to tell our listeners a bit more about yourself? So I guess your struggles, your aspirations, and your contributions that kind of led you to get involved in climate action. And of course, the Reb Rebel Brigade.
I mean, I guess I've always been, since I was like 7 years old or something, I think I went around door to door with the World Peace Campaign petition, thinking that if we just got everybody to sign it, then, you know, that could be achieved and we'd have nuclear disarmament. That was way back when I was 7 years old or so. So I've kind of always been a believer in that kind of thing, and through various incarnations of being in punk bands and stuff like that, and generally I think I've always been interested and engaged in the kind of reclamation of space a little bit, I guess, or the taking over of space, because I believe that it kind of belongs to everybody and it's quite commercially dominated. So it's always interesting when you can kind of play with that, I guess, a little bit. And certainly as a street performer, that was a thing that you did. You know, you took over that space and created a little world of its own there. And similarly with occupied spaces and squat culture. So I've always been on that side of things, fairly anti-establishment, or like pro-community maybe is a better way of thinking about it. And I've been involved with various protests in England and in the traditional sort of forms of protest with banners and marches and things like that. And yeah, experienced quite a bit of that in my travels as well, and always tried to engage in like alternative spaces wherever I went. I guess with the circus as well, we started out very underground. We'd occupy spaces and put shows on, or we'd appear at festivals as well. That was still quite an alternative thing to start with. They'd become a little bit more commercially driven as well. But yeah, we certainly started out very much in that kind of underground realm of occupied spaces. And yeah, as it kind of developed, it got, well, by necessity, it becomes a bit more commercial, and you have to try and make money and support the people that are part of it, and it can, you know, make it work as a business and all this kind of stuff, which I sort of struggled with a little bit. I was much more at ease with it, I guess, when it was a more alternative and underground thing. And we've always been a company that's shared a message about the environment, about community, about people before, you know, profits, and so been a sort of social political commentator in that sense. And yeah, I began to get a little bit disillusioned with the commerciality of festivals and the kind of a lot of the commercial work that we were sort of taking on. So things had lost their meaning a little bit for me, and I ended up at a festival in Panama where I discovered this kind of plastic-strewn coastline, which was quite horrific, because I hadn't really been away for a long time. I travelled quite a lot, as I said, in the 90s, but I hadn't been anywhere like that for maybe 10 years or more. And arriving at the festival site, which was very beautiful, and palm trees and kind of, quite a manicured kind of paradise location, and then going for a walk, around the corner, and it was just kind of this horrific amount of sea plastic and waste just washing up on the shorelines. So I kind of was quite shocked, and also kind of instantly like, oh, what's that, sort of plucking these different bits of plastic and treasures and strange objects and broken toys from the kind of the stuff, and started to make sculptures with that, which was quite powerful in itself. I started making sculptures and putting them at the festival, so people would go, oh, what's this beautiful thing, and kind of walk up to it because you make it look quite beautiful, but then they'd see what it was actually made of and stuff. And it kind of stirred in me, I guess, a want to kind of do something more about the climate crisis with my personally and creatively, I guess. So when I came back to England, that was like the end of March, and I knew that the Extinction Rebellion were having a big protest in London in April. So I kind of, quite randomly, because the costumes that the Red Rebels wear are based on the statue costumes. We used to do a lot of human statue shows in the 90s, which is like all in white and slow motion. One of us was in Canada actually at one of the festivals there. But so I sort of based it on that, and it was very kind of last minute, and I kind of had the idea, but we were going to do circus parades. So it was kind of like a sideline idea. But my friend reminded me about it, so I put a little post on Facebook, and someone gave us 8 bags of red velvet. So we kind of got together in a rush last minute a few days before, and because I was used to making those costumes, we used to make a lot of those costumes when we travelled, and more people would join, and they're quite quick and easy to make. So a few volunteers came along, and we just made 10 or 12 of these costumes, and then just took them to London. We didn't rehearse or anything like that, and just kind of walked out in them. It was actually there was a pink boat that got dropped in Oxford Circus, which was quite an iconic sort of stage for that protest, and we hid all the costumes on that, and then just put them on and kind of went out. And it's quite an easy thing to follow, because we did processions, so you just do what the person in front of you is doing, and once you've got the kind of the speed of it and the kind of inner peace, if you like, it was quite easy for us to just kind of go out. It was quite easy for me, I guess, because I was really used to working like that for years in the street anyway. Not mobile, but like in that kind of zone of performance. So we just have a little tune in and then kind of go out. And one of the first things that happened actually was just this wall of photographers just kind of blocked us as soon as we'd left. And that was quite interesting, because all the reporting I'd seen that morning was just kind of zooming in on like people that were like, dressed like more like Hitler, just sort of stereotyping the whole thing quite strongly. Interviewing people in rainbow jumpers with matching hats, and this kind of just trying to zoom in on like, look at these tree huggers. And then obviously, because they were such powerful images and they looked so beautiful, suddenly all of the front pages just switched to these red images. So it's kind of like media bombing, really. We didn't particularly anticipate that was going to happen or anything. And then just went out, and it just had this really powerful impact on people like audiences, people, the public who saw it, the press, and the police. The police were really sort of unsure of how to react to it, which was kind of what I sort of, I guess, hoped for. I don't know. I didn't really think about it, to be honest, but in retrospect, that was one of the most powerful things, was that it just sort of de-escalated the situation and sort of humanized all the people together, even the police. So it just felt sort of everything would calm down whenever we showed up, which was quite nice impact to have on that sort of situations that can be quite confrontational, I guess. And yeah, I wish I'd thought about it loads more and, could say that I'd spent weeks devising it or something, but it really wasn't like that. It was just kind of off the cuff.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, definitely. It seems like from the get-go, you really have been involved in environmentalism and climate action. I've never really seen it from that perspective, but I was definitely intrigued because in terms of I guess movements here, I would say Extinction Rebellion has really grown, at least in my hometown, and I found out about them through my campus paper because I was covering them, and then typically mainstream media outlets, they don't really cover that sort of stuff. I think that's the one organization that was making traction. So when I came across your organization and how it emerged out of Extinction and Rebellion, I was definitely interested in learning more. And just on that, for the next question, so what, I guess, motivates you to continue in this, I guess, endeavor? How has your climate activism work, I guess, inform and inspire you as a creator of the Reb Rebel Brigade?
Well, I guess it was kind of quite, I don't know, I just wanted to do something sort of beautiful. I was kind of a bit tired of the banners and the shouting and the arguing and the noise of it all. And I was kind of looking to do something sort of performance-based, a bit of a random act of beauty, I suppose. And something that was calm and peaceful, and that somehow would hold the kind of tragedy and the sorrow of the situation, but also express a bit of kind of love and hope in there somehow. And I've always said that it's like you can't be misquoted if you don't say any words, if you don't use words, no one can misquote you. And a lot of that kind of, I don't know, a lot of the arguing and the kind of back and forth about whether it's climate change is and is it this and is it that and all these different kind of voices and arguments denying it, and scientists going no really, and oil companies going no, it's a lie, and private interests and all that stuff is just kind of entirely sort of frustrating and disempowering and upsetting, so I was looking for a way to make myself feel better in some senses as much as anything else. It's just such a tragedy and such a waste to think that we could extinct ourselves and everything else. It's such a really perfect system, and it's kind of down to, it's down to greed and ignorance and a handful really of the human population in charge for this dinosaur kind of system of profit and gain. It just is all just a bit of a sad and tragic kind of thing, and I wanted to kind of be able to sit with that in a sort of positive way and surrender to it in many ways as well, and just be like, this is what it is. And somehow that performance just did kind of do that, and it did it for me personally, I guess. And then a lot of people have said much more beautiful things than me about doing it as well, which has been really heartwarming. So I guess it's kind of, not that I'm really seeking validation, but it was very kind of validating the fact that suddenly it went all around the world, and in the newspapers as well, and then physically lots of people just started doing it everywhere. That's quite a thing to happen to a performance that you make, you know what I mean? Touring to the Sydney Opera House or something, but it's quite heartwarming and quite I don't know, humbling and beautiful that like all of these people in all these different places. And I still hear about new places now, people write in. Someone did actually write in from Canada a few weeks ago asking if there was a brigade there they could join.
I was wondering too.
Maybe it's coming.
Maybe.
So I guess in that way it sort of, I guess it felt rewarding. It felt like it was good, and it gave me some kind of good feelings that had happened, and that piece of art is out there. Even while I sleep, it's out there, weirding out policemen and creating these kind of beautiful moments with people. And people have such different reactions. Some people cry. Some people are like really smiling and hopeful. We've had policemen cry, and some funny things like a police officer. We were stood waiting to be picked up after getting changed, and so were these policemen in Westminster Square in London, and So we just sort of started chatting to them because, you know, they have children and, you know, they have these same concerns and stuff. And one of them said, I'd rather be punched in the face by a football supporter than stared at by you lot.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite funny, in that sense that, like, yeah, the first time we lined up in front of the policeman was a really tense situation where people were getting arrested and carried away. And every time they picked someone up, there's kind of the drums and the protesters would get sort of more loud and slightly, you know, which is it's a volatile energy, isn't it? That energy, when force or violence is in place, and it's completely counter to what we are actually, you know, protesting and saying. We believe in peaceful resistance and this sort of stuff, but those energies are quite volatile. So suddenly, it calmed that down, and you know, there were people locked onto the vehicles. It was just really super emotional.
Yeah.
And like everyone, you know, people started crying, performers were crying, the people locked on were crying, the police started crying. It was like, yeah, it was crazy. And the whole energy of the whole situation just dissipated. And in the end, the police left because they were just like, this is just too weird, I think.
Wow.
So that, you know, that sort of power that it has. Sometimes I don't like talking about it because I don't want the police to be like, okay, we'll go after them or something, you know. But by its nature, it's so inoffensive.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of it. We'll move really slowly. So like sometimes, you know, I'm always banging on, encouraging people to move slower and slower because you see videos where people are sort of marching along in red. But part of it was moving so slowly that we weren't stopping, but we were disrupting things because we're moving so slowly. But you can't be arrested for blocking a road if you're not stopping, you know. Mm-hmm. So we had this kind of, that impact. And just, it was such a lot of fun as well. It was a really funny thing to do, and for all its somberness.
Yeah, no, that definitely would have been a scene to see, because I remember when I came across your performance act in Visby, Sweden last summer. To me, it was very, it was more subtle, but I think it still made a powerful statement somehow, because obviously I've always grown up with the kind of civil disobedience where it's a bit more outspoken and loud, and very rambunctious, and then to see the polar opposite effect, I think it was definitely interesting to see that.
Yeah, I think there's like, you know, I wouldn't say that all protests should be like that. I think there's definitely like a need. And, you know, when I've seen, I don't know if it was in Canada or in America, there was some native, you know, indigenous protests where they were like fully like digging up the road with diggers and like, you know, and I was like, yeah, that's got its place too, you know what I mean? Because I'm not saying that like floating around being beautiful is necessarily the answer. But it's definitely one of them, and it's kind of, I think a lot of people that have joined and performed in it are people that, and we get a lot of older people as well who are really not comfortable in those kind of confrontational situations, maybe, but really find they do that, and people that would never do that in real life as well. So there's people that are quite timid, or I don't know, just the different people you get that are suddenly, who've never done anything like that and wouldn't dream of doing it. Yeah, that's really heartwarming as well, and makes me feel great about it, because they're really taking their space and finding a place for themselves to express that, you know.
Mm-hmm. I meant to ask your definition of what sustainability means to you. So yeah, I guess, what is your personal definition of sustainable development and sustainability? I know you probably know about the Sustainable Development Goals. And is there a specific SDG that you would advocate for?
I mean, sustainability is kind of like the way that everyone's been living more or less for the entire prehistory of the world, isn't it? And, you know, until a couple of hundred years ago with oil, really, things are a lot more sustainable. And it's just unfortunate that we haven't been quick enough to realise that before this kind of capitalist-driven machine has kind of got into motion in some ways. You know, when you look at, I don't know, so I always think about, if there is a future, what the archaeologists are going to find from our time compared to what we found from previous times, you know, when huge civilizations have risen and fallen, but there's only a few shards of pottery, or so little trace left. And there's entire some of the Pacific Islanders, I think it was. I remember reading a book, and the only sign they were there was these huge piles of seashells that they'd made from eating seafood, from eating shellfish. Whereas the kind of mark that we've left is huge. And what's more annoying, I think, is that we don't have the luxury of ignorance, I guess, that we once had, where we could say we didn't know this was going on. And what's worse than that is that we also have the solutions. We have more resources at our fingertips to kind of solve these problems, as like the sustainability goals kind of show, than any generation before at any time in history. We've got more of everything than we could possibly need. Mm-hmm. And yet we don't seem to be able to stop this kind of runaway train driven by a handful of profiteering companies and individuals. So that's kind of the greatest tragedy. And I guess education is the big thing about that. And that's probably one of those, one of the sustainability goals is around that. And it's not about knowing the problems, is it? It's also about sharing and knowing the solutions, but how to kind of rein in these huge entities like states and corporations that are so driven by profit. So how do we, when you look at the numbers, the 36 companies that seem to be wrecking the place to sell us the stuff we don't want, compared to the other 8 billion of us or whatever, it's kind of a crazy conundrum to think that we can't actually stop this thing. So I think that everything does need a major overhaul, and there's a massive change of sort of consciousness about our place in the world is required, and I don't know if we are ready to make that change as a species or not. I guess that's the kind of the saddest thing of all, maybe, is that we collectively, we don't have that capacity. But I think education is where that's the only place that's going to change, and for people to be more aware, but also more aware of the fragility of life and the value of it, I guess, to kind of get over the fact that, these people speak a different language to you, and all of the colonialism, all the stuff there is to unpack is huge, So it's a massive undertaking, but at the same time, we are capable of huge things, collaboration on a mass scale and all this other stuff. So it's a really interesting, the Chinese proverb curse was, may you live in interesting times, and I definitely feel like we do.
Thank you for sharing. It's definitely insightful to hear what you're saying. That is definitely about education and kind of transitioning towards conscious consumerism, just because we live in such a damage control society. And just like on that too, and for the SDGs, it's interesting too, because until I went to Sweden, at least here in the education system in Canada, up until post-secondary, they were really, very much advocate for the SDGs. But being in Scandinavia and seeing how they do it, they actually bash on them. Because again, and now I kind of see their point, that the SDGs very much promote a anthropocentric viewpoint. It's very self-centered on selfish human wants and needs. And it was definitely interesting to see that it doesn't really incorporate, when you think about it, that kind of bio-inclusive or eco-inclusive ethic for all flora and fauna. That's why I think it's really great that there's movements like the Reb Rebel Brigade, where they're looking into things like animal cruelty, and just now getting a bit more into what your organization is all about. So what would you say is the Reb Rebel Brigade's, as a climate movement, what is its core values and intentions?
I wrote a short thing about it really early on, a couple of days in, when people were asking what it was all about and needed to have something. yeah, sharing the blood of all species was the thing about the colour, which only occurred to me when I had to write something down about it. Like, what was it? What did it mean? What was it about? And I was like, I read it. That is all animals, pretty much. I think there's some sort of, I don't know if it's iguanas or some kind of strange lizard that doesn't have red blood, and maybe one of the sea fish or something like this. But in general, everything colour, everything shares that quality. And yeah, we are. I mean, it's crazy. I'm reading a book called Other Lands at the moment, which goes back like 440 million years ago or whatever. It kind of goes back through all these deep histories of the world's formation, long before we came along, And there were so many crazy creatures and different life forms and plants that just evolved and grew and dominated and fell and declined, and so much life has come before us. And there's been some big extinctions by huge kind of environmental forces at play. It's just bonkers to think that one species could actually do that as well. That's quite a horrific achievement, I suppose. So yeah, we're kind of, I guess we're mourning that. We're mourning this travesty of our own making, really, that we are such, we're capable of such beauty and collaboration and, incredible things that humans can do that no other animal or species seems to be able to do, as far as we can tell. I'm not saying that they don't have their own amazing facets that we don't understand either, but it just seems such a travesty that, that we could also, ultimately that will be what destroys us, is our own kind of capabilities. So, I mean, what we set out to do, or what we're trying to achieve, we want people to empathize, I guess, ultimately, and have some realizations, and we want to hit people on an emotional level, and that's the power of art and performance, isn't it? It's different than being sort of told facts or, seeing pictures of terrible things happening to animals or the environment, or people switch off to that stuff. So I guess it was trying to kind of carry this sort of message in a way that people would be struck by it, and that's what it does. And people have all sorts. It's really interesting to think, just to hear what other people say about it is almost more interesting than listening to what I've got to say about it, almost, in some ways, because they have, you get a lot of different things they think it's about. People, is it like an opera's in town, or the Handmaid's Tale? We get a lot of that because of the red dresses, but you get a lot of things. A lot of people have all these different reactions and different meanings, and they think it's, a lot of the time you'd have people saying, "Oh, it's that thing. It's that. It's that. What is it?" And everybody resonates with it, but they can't quite put their finger on it. And some people think it's, and other people think it's from the ancient Greeks, or so people sort of find these references, or Buto dance is another Japanese form. So people make all these references and links and connections to it, but they all empathize with it. They just can't quite figure out why. And I guess not that was really an intention, I suppose, but it's an outcome that was what we were hoping for, kind of mass empathy in some ways. And the fact that that's just, there's troops all over the world kind of just doing that is powerful in itself, I guess. And without words, that's the thing, I guess. If you can make people feel something without telling them what it is, or provoke them gently to find out what it is because they've been affected emotionally, then that's a victory, I think. I'll chalk that as a victory.
No, it's definitely interesting to hear how kind of your showcase makes people interpret it in different ways, and they have this diverse palette of potential ideas. But I think for me, for some reason, I think I knew it had to do with something to do with climate change. It's not just because in Sweden they're huge about that, but I think, and specifically on Gotland, they're very big on sustainable development. But it's interesting to see how people have different ways to definitely reframe what they're seeing. And just on this next question, from your perspective, what are the problems you see working in this field of climate action and activism as a performer? So is there any particular social problems you've seen and identified, and I guess how are you responding to it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it was most impactful when people don't know what it is the first time they see things, you know, so when it first came out or when it happens somewhere that they haven't seen it before, it has a kind of a power and a magic that sort of does diminish the more people get used to things. So like, you know, that was visible in the press. So you're the poster girl of the apocalypse there for a bit, or the poster person rather, and you know, and that kind of fades because they need different things, and people are the same. It's the same with street shows. You know, when you first make the show and no one's seen it before, it works really well and everyone's enthralled. But obviously, when they've seen it thousands of times, you know, less people they sort of know what it is. So I sort of maintaining that magic and mystery about it was sort of important. And in general, people are very respectful. But then, we had people shouting things, or we had someone pushed someone in the ocean at one protest, you know, and stuff like this. So I don't really know, you know, those sort of problems or issues are kind of in a minority, but I guess it's people getting accustomed to it and it becoming like, oh, it's that thing, you know. So I'm hoping, and I sort of see it as well, people, there's always new ways to kind of try and do that, I think, and that's where the sort of performance and protest stuff sort of comes together, because people, you know, they devise new ways. So, you know, a few years ago in the G8 and maybe it was G5 back then, I can't remember. The protests in Italy had the pink posse, who are these like really fluffy pink people with feather dusters. So you'd have all these riot police and then these like fluffy pink people there in between the protesters and the riot police. You know, and that was a really powerful thing because it kind of, there's just something, and same with clowns, as the clown army was a big thing as well. Because the sight of policemen beating up clowns is just too, you know, it's just too bad. It's just too sort of horrible and funny at the same time. I really loved it because of the beautiful nature of it, you know, sort of these random acts of beauty sort of thing. And I think that's a good way to try and go with it. And if I do, anything, you know, we sort of collaborated somewhat with Ocean Rebellion on some of the acts that go out for Ocean Rebellion specifically, with these oil slicks, which are sort of similar black clad figures, but kind of swooshing along the ground, slightly different movement style. And we did some like, you know, dead mermaids that would turn up outside fisheries places and things like that. But I think there's, more random acts of beauty is also something that I've been preoccupied with, how to stage that in a protest setting. Or it's kind of getting harder. What's great about the Reds is that you turn up, you put your costume on, and out you go, and it's kind of easy. Whereas we were trying to do this thing with, you know, performers coming down the sides of the buildings and stuff like that, but it was quite hard to pull that off unless you're kind of well up for being arrested, which is a mixed bag as well. So I'm not quite, so you have to kind of choose your battles in that sense.
I had, for some reason, associated your movement with feminism and ecofeminism. So for me, it was very much associated with that kind of, I guess, like social problem, again, like the forces of reproduction, and maybe advocating for those who are other than human, those underrepresented and marginalized persons. So it's definitely interesting that you come across these issues. But now I know it doesn't really have to do exactly with feminism or feminist movement, but it's definitely interesting to hear your perspective on that. And I also wanted you, on this next question, to get you to define environmental justice, now that we kind of know what you think about sustainability in general. So I guess, how does the intent behind the Red Rebel Brigade relate to climate action and activism? So I guess your perspective on that would be great.
So how does the Red Rebels relating to the bigger?
So and like environmental justice, if that's like an aspect of it, that would be good if you could share that.
I mean, I feel like we do stand for like marginalized peoples and the rights of women and all these things in our way, and we've gone out in various different sort of branches of protest as well, I guess. And how to bring, how do you get justice for this sort of communities or places that are damaged by this kind of ecocide that's kind of put out by corporations like the Niger Delta and places like this, and so many others. I mean, in was it in Panama that they resisted the mining most recently? Sort of national protest took out and objected to the mines, and those kind of small victories, that you don't really hear very much about either. Like that wasn't, because obviously the media is kind of owned by those interests as well, so you don't really hear about the victories, unfortunately. So I mean, I definitely think that we stand with that. It's just how do you actually bring these people to account, because so often we see that the laws aren't really, or they get fined, you know what I mean? So it just makes more money for the state for them to commit the crimes almost, because they can afford to pay the fines, obviously, because they've just made billions of dollars from extracting the resources from this place. And it's, of course, the kind of, it's the poor who will pay the price first, and people that are in those places like the sea levels rising, so those communities are going to suffer first as well. But again, all I see is kind of a lot of talk, a lot of blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg so brilliantly said, and not so much action. And there's a lot of pledges, but they don't actually get delivered. So the pledges get reported, but then the delivery can be a lot slower. So it's something we believe in, and we believe in fighting and protesting for, but how you actually get them to be accountable. And I think that's, again, there's so many fronts to the fight, has so many fronts, because as much as there's like more direct action protests and noisier things and more disruptive things, and there's also all of the people that are fighting through the legal system and in the courts, and I have massive respect for those people as well, because that's like, there's no fun to be had in that process, because that's what it's designed to be, tied up with red tape and make it almost impossible, so. But I was really inspired at the, I don't know if it's COP26 that was in Glasgow. I went to see a lot of speakers there who were a lot of young political activists, and a lot of female young political activists as well, and of different races, who were holding these people to account and taking them through the court process. And I think that's, it's a battle on multiple fronts in that sense, and I've got like every respect and support for that side of the whole movement as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's interesting to hear your perspective on that. And I agree when it comes to a lot of this advocacy. I find that there's a lot of talk and decision happening, but not necessarily a lot of action being taken. So, for example, one of the news stories I broke a couple of years ago, and I don't know if you have this in the UK, but we had a nationwide single-use plastics ban, and you had mentioned you were also kind of involved in that some years ago. And so they had banned, mostly it was kind of with cutlery, but it got more intense as like the months went on. But then I believe less than a year later, I think this was end of 2023, when I was living abroad, I know they had upturned the law. And obviously a lot of oil and gas, like big conglomerate, powerful corporate interests were behind that. But I did definitely see a lot of progress. And now I guess like the policy regulation around is a bit awkward because we're not really adhering to it as much. So I definitely think it's interesting to hear your perspective on that. And just on this next question, you kind of already spoke a little bit about this, but if you wanted to go a bit more into that, so how would you define Reb Rebel Brigade? So what is the overall end goal of Reb Rebel Brigade?
Yeah, I mean, to bear witness, really, I suppose, would be the simplest way of putting it. And that's part of that's part of the sort of almost a mythology that's been built up around them, because they're quite otherworldly, like they're between worlds or between times or whatever. So that sort of presence, and that's something that we kind of, has been a collective thing that people took from it as well, as that they felt like a witness basically to this tragedy, this crime, if you want. So yeah, I mean, again, the end goal is to, I think, like, it's like with any of these things, isn't it? You wanna change the world in some small way. But if there was a goal, it was to kind of make other people a witness as well, really, to bring them into that by showing that's what you are doing. That other people will also look at things. And like I said earlier, you don't want to look at a picture of an animal suffering, or if you show people the information too much, they switch off because they can't handle it. So it's kind of like a gentle way of bringing this incredibly sad and traumatic, facts to the surface for people to empathize with. And in that empathy, the more people empathize, the more, it's happened before. There's been like consumers can change things as well by what they buy and how they choose to deal with things. And I think there needs to be a bit more of that kind of mass kind of, I don't know if it's all about mass civil disobedience, but that would be ideal. Yeah, holding these people to account by refusing to buy their products and stuff like that. That would be ideal. Like, I really sort of, no one should buy Coca-Cola because they're the world's #1 plastic polluter, but people still do because of that terrible song from the 70s that and the power of the marketing and the image of that. And that's an interesting thing as well. It's that the power of all that, this sort of desire that was sold, the image, they use art and imagery as well, to sort of sell us these dreams, which are in fact, totally poisonous and toxic and corrupt, it seems. So we're kind of using the same artillery, if you like, aren't we, by using that sort of creative forces to make people empathize with something else and to think about, especially for future generations and for people with children and things like that. Just in my lifetime, the differences that I've seen in nature, it's horrendous. And like I said, when I went back to paradise and it was knee deep in plastic, I was kind of horrified, And that's in the middle of nowhere. That's like on a really remote stretch of coastline. No one's coming to clean that up. And it's washing up into the streams and getting stuck, and it's just like a microplastics factory in every stream along that coast. And that's just 3 miles of coast in one country, in one part of the world, which is, so it feels like insurmountable in that sense, but then 8 billion people can achieve a lot as well.
That's true. No, definitely. And it's interesting that you mentioned, like with Coca-Cola and like all the greenwashing you see all the time, and especially with Canada. I don't know if you following the news with, this whole with the US tariffs, and they're telling Canadians to be local and to support Canadian brands and to be more intentional about your purchases and to vote with your dollar and to make purchases that align with your values. So I think that's a very valid point. And I like how the Red Rebel Brigade is kind of using creative destruction in its own way. It's like it's rebuttal to all of it. No, that's great. And you had mentioned a little bit about it, but I'm just going to go a bit more into it. So what makes Red Rebel Brigade, I guess, a unique differentiator? So what makes it different from other mainstream climate action movements? So I know it emerged out of Extinction Rebellion. And there's of course Fridays for Future, which is another one. But I guess what makes it like unique and different?
Yeah, we went along to that Extinction Rebellion uprising, as lots of other people and groups did, and it has spread through that network as well. But we weren't kind of, we weren't affiliated with them at all, and they didn't support us doing it or anything like that. Them as in, as much of a company or an entity of sorts that they are. but yeah, we kind of became very much associated with Extinction Rebellion because of the press, I guess, mainly. I mean, what differentiated it so much is the silence and the peace, I guess. And it's really funny at this moment, especially in England, with all the protest laws about not being able to be disruptive or make noise and stuff like that. So I was like, will we be the only ones left allowed to protest? Because we're just kind of silently drifting around. But I guess it's that emotional connection, isn't it? And the silence and the peace of it is really in contrast to most of the forms of protest, I guess. And there's something quite sort of, I don't know, there's something powerful in silence, isn't there? There's something quite strong in stillness, when you're facing aggressive force, or aggressive language, or intense situations. There's something quite powerful in that stillness and that silence and that calm. So we're really calm as well, and that's it. One of the things I was saying about it was that you feel the most alone and the most together with people that you'll ever feel, because you do feel completely in your own space, in your own grieving or your own emotions, your own empathy, your own love, whatever it is. And so then that's really vulnerable, to be out in the street in an intense situation, crying, or, whatever those feelings are that are coming up. But you're also in this group of like 10 or 20 of you or whatever, and you're all there for each other, and you all kind of look the same. So you're sort of, you have that strange thing where you're a real individual, but you're also part of the collective, and you're not yourself as such. People wouldn't recognize you if you were dressed as a Red Rebel necessarily, So people are very empowered by the anonymity of it. But yeah, I think it is that inner calm and that peace that is, reflecting out into its environment around you, and that's what sets it apart, I guess, more than anything else.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. And how is Reb Rebel Brigade affiliated with Extinction Rebellion? So I know you said the kind of media made the association, but did it emerge out of Extinction Rebellion, just for clarification?
No, not. I mean, it emerged out of the Extinction Rebellion uprising, but it wasn't like I wasn't in touch with Extinction Rebellion or anything. Another activist friend of mine was saying, "Can you bring some clowns from the circus up to the protest?" Yeah, we'll bring some circus. And it was just a bit of a sideline thought. So it's a personal connection, again, not with someone that was involved in the sort of core of Extinction Rebellion, but another activist friend. It was like, yeah, we need some circus, we need the circus to come to town. So I was like, okay, we'll get the circus and in Bristol there's a big circus community. And that was our drive, was to go and make these circus parades and use that as a means of sort of stopping traffic. And that was, which we did that as well, just like stopping the traffic at traffic lights and doing a show, which meant that people in the cars didn't get so angry because they were seeing this crazy thing happen. And yeah, as a sideline of that, I kind of devised this idea with the Red Rebels. We never had any contact with Extinction Rebellion directly, but they, obviously they loved us, and we would, when we get to a place, there's usually someone on these different camps who would know what was going to go on, they'd say, "Oh, it'd be great if you guys could get to this place because there's this thing is planned, or there's a tense situation." Like when we showed up on Waterloo Bridge and all the police were there arresting people, so we figured out that if we showed up at those tension points, that could be quite helpful, or powerful, or beautiful, or whatever it is. So we and then of course people saw it, and saw it at the London Extinction Rebellion things, and it was in the press with every Extinction Rebellion write-up, and so people in Extinction Rebellion groups in different countries were then like, oh, one of the girls that performed with us was going back to Norway, I think. Was it Norway? It was one of the Scandinavian countries, Finland maybe, and she was like, "Oh, can I take my costume with me?" And I was like, "Yeah," because it was a real bonding thing. It's the first time we all did it together, and she's like, "I really want to take my costume with me. I'm not sure why." And I was like, "Yeah, do it. Take the costume. get a troupe together, and we sort of realised that it was going to happen. So we made some videos on how to make the costumes and how to do the basic movements. That we just knocked it up really quickly and put out online because we sort of realised it was going to happen, and we wanted the aesthetic sort of quality of the performance to sort of stand. Because that's the thing, when things get sort of copied, they often get diluted. People, and it happened as well, people were slack about the costumes, or they move a bit too fast and less coordinated. But on the whole, people kept the kind of aesthetic of it really strong. But yeah, so it kind of spread through that network. So we will be forever associated with Extinction Rebellion, but it wasn't like, it was more an accident than design sort of situation.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for clarification, because I wasn't too sure, and I'm sure they're two separate things, but somehow they're related. But that makes more sense. But no, I definitely think in terms of performance activism, it's definitely unique because we don't have Reb Rebel Brigade here in Calgary, but we do definitely have Extinction Rebellion. But that idea of having that silent movement, and like you said, the costumes is very powerful in terms of symbolism. And we see things like this all the time, for example, through cosplay is huge, and how it can really transform a person to becoming a change agent. And that's definitely interesting. And just on this next question, so going a bit more into more of the performance aspect of it. So why do you opt for dramatic performance activism for combating the climate crisis? So, just on the second part of this question, why is a generic approach of doing climate activism through protesting and marching, kind of like what we see with things like Extinction Rebellion, why is that, I guess, not as maybe effective, or maybe it goes about it a different way? So why is it that approach of, I guess, how does it differ from yours, how you're doing it in the silent, peaceful, civil disobedience way? So, that would be good to get your perspective on that.
There's so many different sort of crazy performance things that happened with Extinction Rebellion as well. It was a real explosion of kind of colour and music, and there were live musicians, and there were DJs playing sets, and there was inspirational speakers, and there was people in all sorts of different puppet costumes, and there was quite a lot of different stuff. There was like samba bands, the classic kind of samba rhythm, which you'll get in a lot of protests elsewhere as well. I just think there's, like I said before, it's a war on multiple fronts in that sense, and there's a lot, people dancing in the streets. There was a lot of that going on. It was like a festival took over London the first time round, and it was really felt like I was going up for 3 days, and I just didn't leave because I knew that, I'd never experienced London like that again, because it was just this sort of festival atmosphere in these 4 sites that were taken over. And, Oxford Circus was where we were based, and coming from a circus, and the circus coming in and out of there, it just felt like magical, to put a circus in Oxford Circus, which is probably named Oxford Circus because there was a circus there in like way back when, so I feel there's a need for that. There's a need for singing, for dancing, for joy, for happiness, for chatting, for community meetings. There's all of the things, the public assemblies and all these different facets of it. People sitting around, just being with each other and bringing people together from all the different. There was grannies glued to the floor next to teenagers, and there's children. It's like, and there's people that had never. Accountants, and just people that had never protested before. So in that sense, I felt like it was, it was really beautiful in that sense, because it opened it up. And a lot of my activist friends were like, who'd been there frontlining it on their own, more or less, for years, with a handful of tree huggers or hippies or whatever you want to, eco warriors, people with dreadlocks, sort of, how I'd like to be stereotyped or whatever. But, they were kind of elated because suddenly there was just this huge influx of young people, of old people, of, like I said, the accountant always stuck in my mind because he was just such an accountant in his kind of sensible jumper and shirt, and he was like, oh, I work in accounts, I've never really rebelled before, having a great time. So, I think that, you know, compared to us who are quite mournful, silent, you know, it's like, I think that both sides of that are equally valid, and that, yeah, for me it was just about doing something like beautiful and something that couldn't be argued with, because I wasn't willing to argue and I wasn't going to speak. And we had that a lot with police kind of going, you know, can you stop this please? We're walking like down the middle of Oxford Street, which was quite dangerous because the traffic had come back on, you know, nearly got taken out by a motorbike. And there's two policemen were there, a policewoman and a policeman, saying, oh, you know, can you stop this please? And if you talk, you know, if you talk, that was another thing, you know, part of it was that if you talk to the police, they know that you've understood. Right. Whereas if you don't speak, they can't be sure that you've understood what they're saying to you. So, after, you know, I just sort of would faintly smile and sort of look at them with my kind of, you know, 1,000-yard stare, sort of looking back through the ages with the heart of every extinctive beast in my eyes. And they'd be like, okay, Tim, direct the traffic, you know, and then they start directing the traffic for us and things like that, which has sort of made me think that was their job. That's what they should be doing, you know, was what we were doing. But at the same time, yeah, the kind of colour and creativity and community of certainly what happened with Extinction Rebellion in that time, I think is also like super important and also really sort of heartwarming. I couldn't leave. I was there till, I don't know, so late. We were out walking for hours and hours and hours. And I had these terrible shoes. So my back was like killing me after a few days and stuff. I don't know why I didn't go and buy some better shoes. But still, I sort of found it really hard to leave at the end of the day because there was all of this kind of community gathering going on. And also, yeah, I was meant to leave after 3 days, but I just stayed until it ended because I was like, this will never happen again, kind of thing.
Interesting. Like, I like the fact that, you know, civil disobedience can be silent, can be peaceful, and it can be a powerful medium. And maybe a lot of people don't know about it because, of course, when we see, and again, it's the mainstream media, when we see some climate activists, how they're destroying priceless works of arts and museums around the world. And it seems like a very almost, you know, more of a violent approach to doing things. So it's definitely interesting to see the flip side of it. And I think, you know, your movement does an amazing job.
Thanks so much for tuning in to yet another eye-opening episode of Sustainable You. Again, this is an extraordinary and engaging info series whose purpose is to make sustainable development and sustainability accessible to the average person in their quest to quench their knowledge on environmentalism. Be sure to leave your feedback by liking this week's released edition and by subscribing to this podcast. Again, any love from our followers is much appreciated. Signing off until next time.